Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com.
How does rock climbing have to do with mental and financial health? While Dr. Jennifer Dragonette offers her compassionate expertise to communities in crisis, she also shares a passion for rock climbing, a pursuit that we will find intertwines very strongly with her professional insights. Dr. Jen explains how this adventurous sports complements her work as a therapist. She reveals how rock climbing demands for balance, mental fortitude, and fear management mirror the complexities of navigating life's emotional challenges. We also uncover Dr. Jen's career transition journey, from holding significant leadership roles in healthcare organizations to establishing her own private practice. Her story is a testament to the power of aligning one's career with their personal values and overcoming expectations to find true professional fulfillment. I think this conversation can provide valuable insights for anyone grappling with career transitions, anxiety, or simply trying to understand the interplay between physical activities and mental health, along with your financial life as well. Whether you're scaling rock walls or facing life's everyday challenges, I hope this conversation inspires and resonates with you. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. All right, Dr. Jen, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well this morning. Thanks, Paul. How are you?
Well, I'm glad. I think by now most of our listeners will know that both you and Dr. Taryn Clark are from California. You live in the northern part and Dr. Taryn lives in the southern part, Orange County. So obviously you haven't been affected by the fires, obviously where you're at, but because of your background and trauma, I know that you've been a sought after resource for the community from a trauma standpoint. So I guess if you want to just hit on that briefly, because I don't want to focus that on our conversation today. I want to talk more about you and your background for our listeners, and I think a couple topics that really resonate with people going through some career and life transitions of their own. So anything you want to add on, from this trauma standpoint, from what we're seeing in LA with the fires?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. My heart goes out to everybody in LA who's impacted. And I am in Northern California, so I've been saved from these fires, but we certainly had our experience with fires about 7 years ago up here. And that was actually really the beginning of my involvement with the media and being a trauma expert for newspapers and news stations, was when our community up here was going through the wildfires. So for better or for worse, I get called in when there are really significant traumatic events happening. And I just always want people to know that anything that happens that is traumatic can bring up memories of past traumas. It can trigger us to to kind of go into our shell or isolate or go into a fight or flight state. So if that's happening for people, that's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. And oftentimes we really just have to deliberately step outside of our comfort and seek support, because it's so easy to turn inward and feel like you're the only one who's going through something like this.
Very good. So where I wanted to pivot our conversation was to talk about two things that probably our audience does not know about you, and kind of how this kind of all weaves into what you do as a therapist and some of the conversations we've had as what I do as a financial advisor and talking about values and purpose. And one of the unique things I found out about you is that you are a rock climber. And I know absolutely nothing about rock climbing. So tell us a little bit about how you got into rock climbing, what all is involved, and how you work that into being a therapist.
It's been a really interesting journey. So I've been a rock climber for about 4 years. My husband climbed before I did, and at some point he said, I think you'd really like this. I've been practicing yoga for most of my life, and there's a lot of balance involved, certainly a lot of strength and flexibility, but it's really very mental. There's a lot of strategy, and then working through fears, working through anxiety. So the first time I ever climbed outside,
I would say so. Being on a wall of rock would create a lot of anxiety and fear for me.
Yeah, it does. It should. It's supposed to. And so when I work with rock climbers, I have a lot of rock climbers in my private practice. That's one of the things that we talk about is our bodies are doing exactly what they're supposed to do when we have that fear response. We are supposed to be afraid when we're hundreds of feet up from the ground. And so then working through that can be a really important, both physical practice, but also mental and psychological practice for us.
So what is involved with like rock climbing? Like how did you even get started? Obviously you said that your husband was a climber, but how do you even start?
Most people start indoors these days. Climbing has become more popular, so there are many rock climbing gyms throughout the world. So the very first time I climbed was indoors, but it was really my first outdoor experience that got me hooked. I went down to Joshua Tree and hired a wonderful guide who's still a friend of mine. And just that feeling of looking at the rock, looking for small changes so you can put your hands and feet on them, and then recognizing that it's not so much about strength, it's about balance and deliberateness. And that was just a really good fit for me, recognizing that I didn't have to force anything or hoist myself up. I just had to find the right balance. And so as a psychologist, I immediately saw all of these parallels to how we live, how we present ourselves in the world. And so over the past couple of years, I've been fortunate to be able to expand my work as a psychologist into doing a lot of mental strength trainings. I'm very closely affiliated with my own climbing gym up in Santa Rosa, California. And so I do regular mental strength trainings there for the general population as well as their competition teams now. And then my introduction to the podcast world was actually on a rock climbing podcast a couple of years ago, where I got to talk about the overlap of mental health, psychology, and climbing. And then because of that, I've ended up having a really significant portion of my private practice be rock climbers and outdoor adventurers, to the point where now I also volunteer with the American Alpine Club and the Climbers Grief Fund and provide services for climbers who've been through trauma or tragedy as well.
So that's really interesting. So like your niche as a psychologist is working with rock climbers.
One of them, yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's a population that I really understand, and most of the climbers I work with aren't talking to me about rock climbing. They just often say something like, "You're a climber, you'll get it." We do this really wild thing, and we deliberately put ourselves into situations that bring up fear, and then we work through that. And I just have a lot of respect for people who are willing to do that. And then, typically most rock climbers have some level of anxiety. We often have a little bit of ADHD, things that we're trying to climb. It's a very mindful practice. And so it focuses us in the moment. And I really like working with those folks a lot.
Yeah, there's what's been interesting about my firm is that obviously I work with families that don't have twins and triplets, but for those that do, there's this gravitational pull, if you will, to where, oh yeah, Paul and Teresa, they have this unique set of triplets plus one. They just get us. They just understand. Or a family that I work with, they'll tell me that has twins or triplets. So it's not necessarily, maybe I give them different advice. I give the same advice that I would give a family that has 2 kids or 3 kids that aren't, multiples. But there's that, I think that common bond that really helps, solidify that relationship.
Yes.
When you're talking about mindfulness, like when you're on that rock wall, I imagine like you have to be like very focused. Like you mentioned, like trying to find the exact spot where you can put your hand or your feet. It's not for the faint of heart, I would imagine, because you can't let your mind necessarily wander, correct?
Correct. Exactly. And that's actually one of my favorite things about rock climbing is that it almost forces you into a mindful state. And when I'm climbing at my best or when I'm just enjoying it the most, there really is that sense of flow. When we talk about a flow state, when you're on the wall, and to be really clear, I don't do free soloing like Alex Honnold. I always have a rope, right? So it's actually very safe. It's just scary. And so it's kind of that difference between working through what my body tells me is terrifying and what my head can say, I trust my systems. I know it's safe. I know why it's safe. And then when you're in that moment, the world just kind of closes in and it's just about you and what's in front of you, the texture of the rock, really looking at all of those differences, communicating with your partner, because there's a lot of interpersonal aspects to climbing too. You're always with a partner who's got you on belay on the other side of the rope. So it's not something that I do alone. So there's that piece too of really checking in, getting that flow with another human, having them see how you like to be held and how you like to be kept safe. And so it really does, on days when I'm not mindful, I really don't climb as well. And I often have to just be honest with myself that it's not the right day for that. I'm going to go for a hike instead or something like that.
So how do you define a good climb? Because it's not like there's a score to it or a clock you're trying to beat necessarily, correct?
Correct. I love that question, Paul. It's actually one of my favorite things to talk with climbers about. Because we can, like every human, we can get very competitive with ourselves. We often have a lot of drive. Our ego can get in there. And in rock climbing, there are grades that grade the difficulty of a climb. And so anywhere from a 5-5, which is a climb that you're probably not going to fall on, all the way up to climbs that are overhanging and you feel like you're practically upside down, which I don't do a lot of. And so a lot of us get stuck on those numbers. And I think this is a great analogy with life too, that we can get really focused on, is my grade improving? Am I stronger than I was last season? Did I send that route, which means getting to the top of it? And when I work with climbers, I really like to redefine what is success, what makes a good climb. For me, it's, did I enjoy it? Did I learn something? There's so much opportunity to learn in climbing, as in every sport and every activity, really. So I like to think of it like, what about if we were surfing? We would eventually fall in the water. And would we say, oh, that was a terrible run because I fell in the water? No, we would say I was great because I caught a big wave or I had a good time. So that's what it is for me, is if there's flow, if I feel like I'm kind of in the moment, able to focus in, able to enjoy what I'm doing, and I get back down to the ground, I'm like, wow, I did something I didn't think I could do. That for me is a successful climb. Like, I didn't know I could do that, and look what happened. So that's the real enjoyment for me.
And listening to you describe it that way, one thing that came to my mind is enjoying the journey rather than the outcome.
Yes.
And I this is particularly mindful for me right now because I have one of my kids going through a struggle, if you will. I will not name which boy or girl that is, but they are struggling with, this aspect of focus on the end result, whether it's a time or whatever the accomplishment is, rather than focusing on the journey and enjoying the journey. That's probably the key, is enjoying the journey and getting better to be able to put themselves in the position to be able to achieve what they want from a score or time standpoint. But we're having trouble like connecting that joy of enjoying the process of building, the the right technique, the right mindset, versus there's just the sole focus on the end result.
Yes. And, it's interesting. A lot of the climbers I work with are young because I coach our competition teams at the climbing gym I work with. And I love being able to talk to younger people about this. I think so many of us grew up with that philosophy. And now as adults, we're trying to kind of back out of that or rethink, how do I define my own success, whether it's in a sport or in our career or anything else that's important to us. I fully agree with you that enjoying the process and really enjoying coming back to that topic of mindfulness, what am I doing right now? How is this feeding into my sense of self? What am I learning from what's going on? How am I just improving how I feel about myself? If that's helped by winning something or getting to the top of a climb or getting a promotion, great. But that's not everything. And as we've seen as adults, we can get that promotion and still feel less than. We can
Right.
win that competition and still feel like an imposter or still not enjoy what we're doing. So it can't be about the goal. It really needs to be about that process and the journey.
So one of the other, I think, interesting topics I wanted to pull on during our conversation about your background is how you came into the world of psychology and how you got to where you're at today with your own private practice. And we're recording this early in the new year still. And I think this is a topic that will resonate with a lot of people because I know there's certainly people that I'm working with as far as TAMA families go that are really struggling with their career, whether they're going through a job transition on their own or are thinking of one or are not in a good place from a career job standpoint. I would like for you to tell us your story and how you went through these various transitions of where you were at to where you are at today.
Thanks, Paul. It's actually very similar to what we were just talking about with climbing. So I think it feeds in well. I've known for a long time that I wanted to be a psychologist. I'm one of the few children who kind of knew that. I have some psychologists in my family who I love and admire. And so moving into this field was a pretty easy choice for me. I had a few other jobs before I started graduate school. And at this point, I've been a psychologist for about 20 years. And when I started in this field and in this career, I was an individual contributor. I was doing therapy. I was working in a larger hospital setting, and I loved that and doing a lot of teaching in groups. And then some leadership opportunities came my way, and I was very resistant to it at first because I loved what I did. But I also had this sense, and probably a lot of our listeners have this feeling of, I could probably do that, or, here's a challenge, here's an opportunity, maybe it's worth trying. And so I did. And I enjoyed a lot of things about leadership. And then over the years, as happens to a lot of us, I just kept moving up and up and up into bigger and bigger levels of leadership. So I started as a training director for a postdoctoral residency that I was a postdoc in at the end of my graduate school. And then I moved into a manager position in a large healthcare organization. I then became the director of behavioral health for our local healthcare center. And then more recently, I was the executive director for Newport Healthcare, which is a wonderful organization that allowed me to start a whole region of facilities in Northern California, during which I was opening up residential facilities for adolescents with mental health and substance use challenges. So that was a really big job.
I was going to say, those are big roles.
Yeah, they were big roles. And a lot of those roles, I started in my 30s. So I really felt like an imposter a lot of the time and was often managing people older than I was or, with a lot more experience. And yet I enjoyed it. And it was a really good challenge. And I wasn't yet a rock climber, but that same idea of, okay, what can I learn here and how can I grow and improve? And eventually I got to that executive director position and I loved so many things about it. I loved the nuts and bolts of opening facilities and hiring people and staffing things and supervising. And then I got to the point where I recognized, very much like we've talked about in other podcasts, that I had kind of lost sight of my own personal values. And I was able to do a little bit of teaching in that role, which was really just on the edges, kind of an additional thing because I enjoyed it so much. And I found myself teaching a type of therapy that I personally practice called acceptance and commitment therapy, which talks about values like we've talked about. And there are these moments, you probably have this too, where I just heard myself teaching. And it was one of those kind of physician heal thyself moments where I said, "Oh, Jen, you've got to listen to what you're saying right now." Because I was talking about, are we living as though we value what we say we value? And I was saying I valued connection, adventure, my family, learning. And yet I was waking up with my heart racing because I had literally 1,000 emails from the day before that I had to respond to. And I was head down doing so much administrative work that I really had gotten so far away from what I wanted to be doing in my life. And I think those jobs are wonderful for some people. And I just recognized really painfully that it wasn't where I wanted to be in my career. And so I began a discernment process. I still have this page from my old notebook where I wrote down things I loved about my job, things I didn't love about my job.
Did you
And the
find
things
it,
I
sorry
loved,
to interrupt, did you
Mhm,
find it hard to do that? Because like take the time to like
mhm,
physically write those things down, because I think that's one of the struggles I have with families I work with is just getting them like they know that they should probably do that, but like I haven't found the right avenue to actually get them to sit down and do it.
I did. I started carrying around a little notebook and I would just throughout the day jot things down. If I found myself thinking, "Oh, I'm really enjoying this," I would put it in the pros column. Or if I found myself, I'm not enjoying this," I would put it in the cons column. So it was really more of a couple of weeks where I just really allowed myself a few seconds at a time rather than a sit down, let's really hash this out kind of experience. So I created that list and I found that, yeah, unfortunately, the things that I enjoyed was a very, very small list. I enjoyed teaching. I enjoyed supervising other therapists. I enjoyed connecting with the media and being able to have some influence and reduce stigma around mental health. And so I went to the CEO of the company, a wonderful man who had hired me back in the day. And I just said, "Joe, here's what's happening, right? I love parts of this, and the entirety of this job is not right for me anymore." And to his credit, he said, "Well, what would you like to do? Can we keep you in any way?" And I said, I'm willing to stay in a very part-time role if I can do these things. And so that's what happened. So I'm still affiliated with them. I teach a couple of classes. I teach their therapists around the country how to do the types of therapy that I really enjoy doing. And then I slowly started my private practice. And it was a really interesting experience because I found that, and this may apply to some of your clients too, I found that the idea of not moving up, which I'm putting in quotes for those of you who are listening, was very scary
Yeah.
because we just have this ethic in our culture that we are supposed to have bigger and bigger and bigger jobs. And I was an executive director, so my next job would be a vice president or a CEO, and it's just not where my heart was. And I found that the biggest barrier for me was this message I kept hearing in my head. Who do you think you are to be able to create a job that you love? Who do you think you are to be able to lean out and move kind of down the ladder and do something as an individual contributor again? And when I finally recognized that's what I was hearing, I said that out loud. And I said it to my husband, and he said, "Who do you think you are? You're exactly the right person to do that." And it was just so helpful to put that into words that I was really getting stuck on that kind of its own type of imposter that I was supposed to do something in my mind. And the more I thought about it, I realized the people who I care about will not love me any less if I have a different job. In fact, I'm going to be able to be more present for them. I'm going to be able to lean into the things that really matter to me. And so I eventually took that deep breath and, changed my career and moved into my practice. And I will tell you more about it, but the quick thing I'll say is I've never been happier.
Well, there are so many threads to pull on, and we'll probably save some of these for another conversation. But one thought that comes in my mind is like my good friend Carl Richards, who's a pioneer in the financial planning space. He talks about this all the time. Like he's like I'm the king of permission granting. Like, and we talk about this with other peers within the financial planning community about giving ourselves this ability to build these really unique firms that we want and not continuing chasing
growth after growth after growth. And I have this conversation a lot with the families that I work with, as far as, you know, I'm building or have built Tama to be this very unique family, if you will, that's focused on serving a small set of families with these unique challenges. And that's my drive. That's kind of like what you were talking about.
Mhm.
I did want to go back to one piece that I think a lot of people listening will find value in, is what did that feel like to go to your boss to talk about that? And like, I'm sure that there was some anxiety and trepidation around that, because I think, going back to your point about this whole, like, giving yourself permission to do what you want to do, the people don't just, like, taking the time to write things down or to find that purpose and value would not allow themselves to go and do something like that. So
Mhm.
what did that feel like? What was that like?
It was terrifying. Respect. Yeah, I was so nervous,
Well,
and
I guess, how did you have the courage to face that, I guess?
yeah, I think it really was that conversation that I had with myself, and then the conversation that I had with my husband, where I realized that what was holding me back was the shoulds. You shouldn't do this, or
Which we've
it's
talked
not
about
acceptable.
previously.
Yep, I was shitting all over
Yep.
myself, and so that got clear to me. And I'm someone who, once that type of realization hits me, it's really hard to unsee it. And I recognized I can't live my life based on what I think. I mean, I'm mind reading, right? I think other people think I should be doing this. What a waste, right? To be doing a job that someone else might really love that I'm not loving, where the only thing that's holding me back is a sense of, am I allowed to do this, or is that okay? So even though it was really terrifying, I really presented it to him in exactly the way I just did to you, that I have recognized and really gone through this discernment that my skills would be better used elsewhere. I'd actually be more valuable to this company in a different way. And the thing that I had to be okay with before that conversation is I really had to work through, if he says we can't do that, I had to be able to walk away, and I had to be able to feel okay with that, and have that be an acceptable outcome.
Because I know a lot of people, well, it's all relative. So let me kind of rephrase that. People, I think that fear keeps people from going and just having the conversation, not knowing, like, what could actually happen. And
Yes.
I I I struggle with trying to give people advice on how to overcome that fear. Just like, when I know that when people first knock on my door or have a conversation with me, probably not all that dissimilar to you, is that I know that there's a lot of fear, anxiety, and trepidation of having a conversation about their financial life with, at that point, a
Mhm.
complete stranger, unless they knew me personally and what I do. And it's not lost on me. So, like, during the first hour conversation I have with a family, one of my biggest jobs, I feel like, is to try to take the temperature of the room down as much as possible, to let people put their guards and stereotypes away, so that we can get at the 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 root of why they're there.
Exactly, exactly. And as you were saying that, Paul, I was remembering, because it's been about 4 years or so, 5 years actually, since I started moving out of that role. And I remember one of my biggest personal concerns at that point is that I was a leader, and a lot of other leaders were under my care. And I really feel that way about people who were reporting up to me. There were dozens of leaders who I was supervising, and hundreds of people underneath them. And I felt so bad about abandoning them or leaving them. And I really had to come to realize that I hired them because they were competent and amazing people, and they would be able to handle that shift. And they were. And I was able to have those conversations with them. But I really had to let go of the make suring that we've talked about, that I have to make sure they're okay. They could do that on their own. And then I could shift into a role where I could really have an impact, just like you do when people come in your office. That's one of my greatest joys, is having somebody come see me for therapy, whether it's a rock climber or just a normal person who's coming to see me for anxiety or couples therapy. and be able to let that breathing come down. Say, okay, you are safe in this space. This is going to be helpful. I'm here with you. There's nothing wrong with you because you need this help. There are times when I say to myself, oh gosh, I wish I had made that shift earlier. And then I recognize that all of my experiences leading up to my private practice made me able to be there and hold that space for people in the way that I can, that I probably wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't been in charge of all these things or seeing people through the systems or leading in the way that I had to do.
Well, I hope that our listeners have gotten deeper into your soul, if you will, and what makes Dr. Jennifer Dragonette tick in her background. But I think, as always, we touch on so many great points of therapy and financial planning with these conversations, Dr. Jen. And I can't thank you enough for opening up and sharing, your personal story with the listeners, and hopefully giving a few of them motivation to face that fear and anxiety and do what's in their best interest.
Thanks so much, Paul. It's always a joy to talk to you, and this is such a fun topic. So thanks for leaving space for it.
Thank you. I think it's pretty fascinating how the different things that we do in life can overlap and impact one another. It's outstanding how Dr. Jen can pull together what she takes from rock climbing and apply that into her professional life as a licensed therapist. I think what's really interesting to me is how we strike at this chord of how mindfulness matters, both in rock climbing and in life. Being present and being mindful can significantly enhance your relationships, your performance, and your happiness. And as I think about how this ties into a financial perspective, I think that tie is very strong. I think that having a sound emotional well-being through the things that we do and the choices that we make feed upon each other, and they help us make better decisions. So when we're feeling good physically and mentally, we're making better financial decisions, more than likely, and vice versa. When we're not feeling good, when we are struggling with anxiety or stress, that's not the time to make heavy financial decisions. So it's understanding our own physical and mental makeup and embracing that journey that we're all on in order to make the best decisions, not only for ourselves, for our relationships, but for our families. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.